All right. So I just want to talk a little bit about this idea that I was talking about this morning about getting out of your comfort zone. And there's something about this whole concept of our comfort zones. You know, we tend to, wherever we are, we tend to exist in a bubble and not really think about, the way other people think. And there's something to be said about understanding where other people are coming from without losing your own identity. And I think there's people, they either tend to go to one extreme or the other. I love the idea, for example, of a lot of the ideas of what's called open orthodoxy in theory. But in practice, so many of the open orthodox are just knee-jerk leftists and don't actually consider, what options, it's almost to them that all there is the left, and there's nothing else. Meaning, if you try to be more or less a mainstream Orthodox Jew in the open Orthodox community, you're a pariah. That's not what we do. Meaning they've just replaced again one orthodoxy for another, a little orthodoxy. Meaning they claim that they're thinking for themselves, but they're not actually thinking for themselves. And we have to try to learn how to think for ourselves, no matter who we are, where we come from. And instead, some people have accused this in some of these circles. But again, I like this idea of going back to the texts, having a text-based Judaism, as far as the Ikra Din, and leaving people up, to decide other things that are matters of minhag and so forth, and not being so fundamentalist. But then they just wind up being fundamentalist in the other direction. They don't wind up being anything special, anything different. They're just the same as they've always been, and just something else. Just, all right, instead of this, it's that. And it's nothing, what do they want? What do they expect? So these are the types of things that we have to understand. And I think really a way to approach that is, like I said, like we said in this morning's video, at different things that I'm saying, how should we, who are more on the right, look at these other things that exist in the world that we wish did not exist, whether political movements, religious movements, and so forth. And it would seem that, like, the simple answer would be, like I said, how do we approach a lot of these other issues? How do we approach things that we ourselves recognize, this is not in our society today. These are things that were in our Torah. They're not in our society today. And so, like we spoke about the Rambamist, the Maimonidean approach of saying that a lot of these things did not belong in society, and that these were part of ancient society that we've grown out of. It's easier to say with slavery. It's harder to say with the korbanos. But still, essentially, that's what it is, there are certain things that maybe we grow out of, whatever, and there are ways to deal with certain things in a healthy way. I recognize, it's not easy. It's not necessarily, what we necessarily want. But how do we deal with these things? How do we interact with the world where there are things that, I'd rather not have it. And so these are some of the ways. And again, to go back to, how did Chazal deal with, for example, heretical movements? What kind of interaction did they have with them? They recognized that these people existed, and there's very little we could do about that. And sometimes we have to interact with them, and sometimes we shouldn't. In some ways, we should see them as not being part of the Jewish people, and in some ways, we can't avoid that they are. And these types of questions are difficult. How did Chazal and our Gedolei Yisrael throughout the generations deal with people of other religions? What kind of interactions did they have? Whether we go back to times of Chazal, Gemara and Avodah Zarah, we go into more modern era, things like how did both Rabbi Yaakov Emden and Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, who didn't get along with each other, they had a lot of interaction with clergy of other religions, and so how do we deal with that, what else can we deal with there? How do we deal with a lot of other similar questions, and the truth of the matter is, different Gedolei Yisrael had different approaches to dealing with different things. What do you call it? The way Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch dealt with reform, the way the Chassam Sofer dealt with the reform, different things like this. These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves, and were those for that time and not for this time? Maybe certain things that were the way to approach things at one time, because they were trying to prevent these movements from growing, maybe they are different today because it's already several generations in. And so we look at these people the way that the Chazal looked at the Sadducees, at the Vaitusim, at these other heretical groups that developed. I mean, when we had such a situation, in the time of Chazal, in the time of the Second Temple, where, the high priests were heretics, I mean, how do we deal with something like that, And so, too, I mean, today, certainly there's wisdom in something like how the Satmarav would approach things. He in America particularly, he said, there were certain government funds that were being distributed to different groups, and some were secular Jewish groups, and they started to harass the Satmar community over issues of Zionism, and the Satmar Rebbe said, this is America. We can start our own organizations, and we don't need to go through Jewish Federation or something. We don't need to kowtow to anybody, because we live in a free country. There's certainly wisdom in that, but then on the other hand, are there things that we can work together on, whether it's or should we try to interact with people for the sake of kiruv? Should we try to, enter into these worlds, places like Hillel and Federation, or should we avoid them? And these are questions that really each community has to figure out on its own. It's not really for us to make those decisions on our own. And you can't make blanket statements that this is what applies for all Jews. Each community has its own thing, so we've got to think about these things in a wise way, in an intelligent way. But also not to do things on our own necessarily. You have to talk to tzaddikim and have eitzes, have advice from the right sources, and not just do whatever we want. It's difficult. It's not as simple as we think. But the thing is that quite often we don't know what to ask, and we don't know who to ask. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, if you'll get a lenient answer that's halachic from a source that you wouldn't expect to get it from," and then people are going to tell you, well, no, you can't do this. Well, I asked this Rav, can I do this? And he said yes, and he was pretty emphatic that there was nothing wrong with X, Y, or Z. And yet, we still find ourselves, well, this is not what's mainstream, But so then, at what point do you, have any answers for anything? Just everything has to be mainstream, and everyone has to fit into this bubble. That's not how the Jewish world ever was. And we do have to recognize that there are certain things that are not going to change as much as we'd like them to. But also, that doesn't mean, and the fact is, we're also not going to see that the open Orthodox are going to be are going to give up, their hatred of Donald Trump, or something ridiculous like that. It's really quite sickening to me that the disrespect that a particular rabbi in Arizona, who I was always pretty respectful of, and I never had a problem with him, but that I dare say that Donald Trump is not evil, not even say he's good, just he's not evil, and this rabbi blocked me on Facebook or whatever, it's a little weird, So that's the world we live in. Thank you for listening. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you later. What else? What else can we talk about? I didn't really say anything in this video, did I? I'd like to have a conversation about this, though. Um, does somebody have some comments that we could share about this? That would be a positive way to talk about these things. So let me know what you think about this, and the same thing is with all kinds of things, with political things, with, how do we find a balance? All right. We can't expect everybody to be the same, like, I don't know, I was watching a video that I was actually quite, interested in, like, they had to, like, come into this, like, just anti-conservative, anti-politically conservative rhetoric that just, that wasn't based on anything. It was just like, ew, that's gross. Like, so, what like, that's not a reason. It's not an answer. It's just like, oh, yeah, well, obviously, nobody, why you want to alienate half of your potential audience by saying, ew, that's gross, even though the point was that it's not. They're like, oh, I know that, ew, that's gross, but, all right, well, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll talk later. How do I turn this off? This one?